why is the world as crazy as it is? How does history inform where we are now? History doesn't exist in a vacuum. We don't either. Why is contemporary America the way it is? Well, here's how we got here. Here are the figures that brought us here. Here are the movements that brought us here. We're all the products of that, whether we want to be or not. And it got so bad in Missouri that the governor of Missouri at the time, Lilburn Boggs, issued an extermination order. You better pretty much kill any Mormon on sight. That order was rescinded in 1976. You could, in theory, do whatever you wanted to to a Mormon in Missouri until 1976. Now, as a result of that, the Mormons began to take seriously their self-defense. And on down to today, they still have a very robust preparedness and self-defense culture, and I believe that it comes out of the persecutions that they suffered early on. And that's why when you talk to ex-Mormons, that is one of the troubling things, that revelations change. So polygamy was the way to the celestial kingdom, and now polygamy is a sin. That would be a hard one to live through, I would imagine. They believe that changes are a normal part of revelation, and that a lot of revelations are conditional. So if they don't come true, like a prophecy doesn't come true, it's largely because we failed up to our conditions to make that prophecy come to pass, for example.
Here we are, back to On the Line. And today we've got a treat. First of two interviews. Actually, I'm not sure. We might air the second one first. We'll see. But
Your show.
Either way, we're with Pastor and Colonel Willie Grills. And today we're going to be talking about Mormonism. But maybe as a starting point, I'm just kind of interested in, so you're the co-host with Adam Koontz on Brief History of Power. Many people call it B-Hop. So just kind of interested in what got you into this, kind of what your background is, and then also what some of your goals are with the channel, because it's a beautiful channel.
Sure. My relationship with Brief History of Power goes back to an earlier podcast some people might remember fondly, Word Fitly Spoken, and Dr. Koontz and I were on that a lot. I was the co-host of that, like I transitioned into with Brief History of Power. Both shows kind of aiming to peel back the onion on some things that we don't always talk about in the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod, or confessional Lutheranism in general. Some of our forgotten history, and especially some of the contemporary stuff that doesn't always get talked about. And we think we found an audience. People seem to enjoy it. And cranks call in or email in too. We've got those as well. So just kind of bros being bros that grew into a podcast, that grew into another podcast. Although it's not really fair to say Word Fitly grew into Brief History. Brief History is its own thing, but a lot of shared history there between the two shows. And very similar voices on there, and two of the exact same personalities. So that's where we are, and we're rocking and rolling with that right now.
So what have you found, because like us, you're able to kind of track what gets traction. Are there certain things that have gotten traction that you didn't expect, or what would be kind of like, what are people interested in from your perspective based off of, engagement?
Yeah, I'm biased. People are interested, despite what some might say. They are interested in UFOs, and they are interested in Bigfoot, and they are interested in the weather and things like that. But beyond those things that are near and dear to my heart, people do want to hear a lot about the contemporary ethical issues. People do want to hear about theological things. There is a hunger out there for theology, as you know from this show, that goes beyond just maybe catechism talking points or things like that. Really, the intersection of theology and reality. So we have the book Theology. What does that look like in contemporary life? We have also, especially recently, probably in the last couple of years with Brief History of Power, how does history inform where we are now? History doesn't exist in a vacuum. We don't either. Why are we here in America the way we are? Why is contemporary America the way it is? Well, here's how we got here. Here are the figures that brought us here. Here are the movements that brought us here. And we're all the products of that, whether we want to be or not. We all kind of LARP about going back to the 16th century or something and being proto-Amish, but we still live in the century that we live in the decade and the year that we live in. And how did we get here? Why is the world as crazy as it is? Or why is the world as good as it is? It's not all bad. There are certainly some positive things out there. So people just want to hear things that inform them about the life that they live. And that can be the strange stuff that we'll talk about, or I should say we've already talked about, depending on when this airs. Or it can be just the very mundane things. People want to hear everything from vaccine theory to governmental conspiracy theory kind of stuff, JFK stuff, all the way to how do I do devotions as a family.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was a video. Probably I was like in high school or something. Couldn't name the guy. My dad came across this and he was just fascinated. And it was probably a very early dose of kind of conspiratorial, kind of like diving into certain things and then connecting it with kind of theology.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you who the guy is again, but I watched it and I don't think I understood it. But I think it was called something like The Theory of Everything, right? But I think that is a kind of an important aspect of theology. Is like it's fine to do systematics, right? And we need to do systematics where you dive into a specific topic and you kind of analyze the details from a scriptural background, traditional background, whatever, and kind of formulate that argument. But I think people are very interested in, if theology is true in the way that we articulate it, then it does encapsulate everything. And there's going to be historical nuances. There's going to be things that are called conspiratorial nuances that maybe shine a light on the nature of evil, and these things, and all of that plays into the way that we see clearly. And that's where I think history and some of these other things we're going to explore help a lot, because they add kind of good data points and context to the way that we see the world around us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all one big web that comes together, and we're caught in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is either what are we doing in the web, or maybe it's how we get out of the web. But there it is. It's all connected. And whether you believe everything we talk about or not is irrelevant. Some people out there believe it. And even if the conspiratorial side isn't true or seems far-fetched, at least it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
At least it's something you can listen to when you're driving.
Yeah.
I don't have to hear about the history of Simonex for the 50th time this year or something like that.
Yeah.
Apologies to my Simonex devotees, but there are other things that happen in the history of the Synod and in the history of the United States of America or the world that might be interesting too, maybe even more interesting.
Yeah. So we're going to do in this one, we're going to focus on one thing, which I think has a lot of relevance today, because, and you can speak to this, but, certainly something that's been growing, I think, over the last 40, 50 years, and that is Mormonism.
Right.
Right. And so the way we're going to kind of do this is, you've done a series on this going through the history. So we're just going to kind of go through the history of what was the context that set this up. How did Mormonism get its feet underneath it? What did it move into? And that'll help us kind of understand the theology of Mormonism, which again should help us understand the theology of Christianity in comparison. So
sure.
What's a good starting point? If we're going to understand Mormonism, what do we have to start with?
Yeah, we'll start in the early 1800s, late 1700s, with the birth of the Second Great Awakening. So the First Great Awakening is done. Men like George Whitefield, Jonathan Edwards really made their mark. They changed the way that we preached in America and in England. Preaching became more emotionally driven. I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way, but the character of preaching changed. The outward focus of preaching changed. George Whitefield is probably the first celebrity that the colonies have, preaching out in open-air fields when he wasn't allowed to preach elsewhere sometimes. Men like John Wesley, they really changed the way Americans approached their religion, which was very formal. And I don't mean that liturgically necessarily, although in some cases it was, but a turn toward the heart, a turn toward emotion. That did lead to certain districts where they preached reviving, but in some cases it led to a great fire building and then ashes left. So now America is ready for something different. So we come into the Second Great Awakening, where the First Great Awakening really relied on the creeds and relied on established norms. The Second Great Awakening does not. There are certainly people who do. There are certainly denominations that exist today that held on to traditional norms. But in the Second Great Awakening, we see a great removal of creedal Christianity, for example, or catechisms, or confessions of faith. People were claiming to have revelations and visions. And so that's a direct revelation from God, so who can contradict that? The Westminster Confession of Faith can't do that. The Book of Concord, if they'd ever heard of such a thing, it can't do that. Because we're just not major players at the time in America. So you have the Methodists, which are growing rapidly because of what happened in the First Great Awakening. They're going to continue to grow rapidly up into the 19th century. We think about Baptists being the big group that grows during this time. It's really the Methodists as far as just explosion of numbers. Revivals go from being this unique thing in the First Great Awakening to being the expected norm by the time the Second Great Awakening rolls around. And so So this idea of a special series of services, often outdoors, often accompanied with a festive kind of atmosphere, becomes not only accepted but expected during this time period. And it's there that the Latter-day Saint movement will really be born. Now, a Latter-day Saint will probably disagree with me on that, because there are certain dates and times where it's properly born, as far as the establishment of the church or the angel Moroni visiting Joseph Smith, those kinds of things. But it probably couldn't have taken root in an earlier America that was more entrenched in its doctrine. But it takes root in places where revivalism took root. Rural America that was looking for something new, and frankly, something entertaining. This is not only spiritual for these people, this is entertainment too. This is something to go and do. And so Joseph Smith comes up in a time where, and especially in the city, where Methodism is, a Methodist revival is going on. And it's there where he first begins to kind of question Christianity. He has a very bad experience with a pastor at one point in his life about the eternal destiny of his deceased brother, for example. He was told he's going to hell because he's not baptized. That comes a little bit, later in his experience. But the traditional narrative of Joseph Smith goes that from an early age, he was very quizzical, very kind of precocious, but very smart. It's an interesting thing to study Mormon history, because there's one camp that says he was a dumb, illiterate farm boy. And when I read Joseph Smith, I don't find anyone dumb there or illiterate. I find a very clever man there, a very clever character. And so I have no doubt that he was searching for things early on. But one day when he's around 14, he's out in the woods and he goes and he asks God, what is the true church? Which church should I join? We know that he had attended Bible studies at Methodist camps and Methodist churches, things like that. But what is the one true church that I should join? And according to the narrative, God tells him none of them. They're all apostate. There is no true church yet. It could be reestablished.
So that's not even just that point in time. That's something that would go back into history. Like that message. Yeah. Like you would also say like the church in the 1300s. The
exactly.
Church in the 500s.
This is a very important thing that the Latter-day Saint movement, the Restoration, I'm going to use kind of their terms for this. Restoration becomes tricky because they call it the Restoration, but the Churches of Christ also call their movement the Restoration movement. And so it gets a little confusing there. But they have to presuppose, and I guess Churches of Christ would have to presuppose this, a lot of Baptists presuppose this, that there was a great apostasy at some point. And it usually begins around the Council of Nicaea, where the church and government are intermingled. Now you have creeds that bind men's consciences. And so somewhere early on in the history of the church, they fall away from the truth of doctrine. So when you have that, you have this dark period where there was no truth and no church. Now, particularly in Mormon theology, and this comes from Joseph Smith, we can get into that a little bit later, that doesn't mean everybody born during the Dark Ages was consigned to hell at all, but there was no true church on earth at that time. And so this is an important question for really any Christian, setting aside the Latter-day Saints for a moment. If there was no church, where was it? Did the gates of hell prevail? And if there is no church, then how do you prove who has true doctrine? And so one group will say, well, we believe in the Bible alone. Yeah, so do Lutherans, right? But we have a very different interpretation of Scripture than a Baptist would, or a Presbyterian, or a Pentecostal, for example. And maybe I'll make the case that you have proto-Pentecostalism in the Book of Mormon, but again, we'll see where we go. But you have basically nothing to go back to say, no, there is an unbroken line of truth, and anything that goes against that isn't normed by the creeds in this case, is false, because it doesn't agree with what was handed down that was true, and then it doesn't agree with Scripture. You can really invent what you want if you can jettison all of Christian history and go back to a very, at least from their understanding of history, a very unclear time. Now, I don't find the Church Fathers unclear. I think there is a fairly firm consensus among the Church Fathers on a lot of things. I mean, I'm a Lutheran, that shouldn't surprise anyone, but there is no need to go into the Church Fathers if you're only the kind of sola scriptura that says history won't inform us, or if you're a Latter-day Saint who says that new revelation is coming to change those things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things when we're contending with Mormons or talking with the Latter-day Saint, we come at the faith from a very different perspective. I don't think Lutherans begin with a testimony, for example, a testimony of truth in their heart as far as a feeling goes. And that is foundational to a Mormon or to a Latter-day Saint.
So what things in the Second Great Awakening, theologically speaking, before Joseph Smith are already being left behind?
Well, there is the idea of who can preach and who can't.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be a very big part of the Latter-day Saint movement early on, the reestablishing of the priesthood, the reestablishing of a right order within the church. That is jettisoned in large part during the Second Great Awakening, because we go from very strict ordination standards, very strict licensures for preaching, to virtually none of that. And the argument was, here these revivals are happening, here are all these people out in the prairie or out wherever, and they can't hear the gospel because we don't have enough rightly ordained men or rightly trained men, and the training for the pastorate is too burdensome. That might sound familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got to ordain the men that we can, how we can.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get a lot of people who are just claiming to be preachers. It's just popping up everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They try to work sometimes within the established denominations. Sometimes they're expelled. Sometimes they voluntarily leave and start their own. I think one good example of this would be the Stone Campbell Restoration Movement. That is really what births the Disciples of Christ, Church of Christ, Christian churches, following Alexander Campbell and his father, who were good Scotch Presbyterians, but who decided that the Westminster Confession of Faith wasn't correct. And so they began to study the scriptures for themselves, and they came up with something that approached Baptist theology, but with baptismal regeneration, kind of with a little bit, not really anachronistic, but an understanding of that the Old Testament has nothing to say to us. So he kind of famously, Campbell gets ran out of a Baptist church for saying we're not bound to the Ten Commandments. He didn't mean it in a licentious way. He's just saying that dispensation is done. And so his associate, Barton W. Stone, which at the Cane Ridge Revival, where these two men meet and join hands, started by Barton W. Stone, that's really what is considered oftentimes the birth of the Second Great Awakening, this gigantic revival that happens. And they are united on the principle of unity, ostensibly, but who determines what unity is? And so you get another interesting thing happening at this time, which is the rise of the publisher as theologian. So the printing is getting cheaper. Anybody can make a newspaper. You have a time period where people are drunk on the millennium. They want to bring in the millennium. That's going to be true for the early disciples of Christ with Stone and Campbell, or with Campbell specifically. It's going to be true with Joseph Smith as well, that we are going to so evangelize the country and the world that it will usher in the 1,000-year reign of Christ. For the Campbellites, it's a pejorative term, but for clarity I'll use it, they were pretty much post-millennialists. So we know a lot about premillennialists. You might have talked about this on your show. You might be familiar
Not
with
yet.
it, where things are going to get really, really bad, then Jesus shows up. Or if you're a dispensational premillennialist, things are going to get really, really bad. Jesus shows up for a minute, raptures everybody out. It gets really, really bad, and then he comes back again. So you get 2.5 comings of Christ. But a postmillennialist would say that the world gets better and better, and the church wins and wins and wins until Jesus returns.
So like the red carpet's laid out. Yeah. Everything's all prepared. Yeah.
And that was a very common, maybe even the most common eschatological view of evangelical Christians of this kind of new flavor until World War I really dashed those.
Yeah.
The biggest war that the world has ever seen will kind of throw away any utopian dreams that you have.
So in the culture at the time, like the things you're describing would make a lot of sense today or in the 60s, right, where you've got kind of a postmodernism, right, which kind of subjectivizes truth to some degree. Also a strong distrust in institutions, right? We've had a lot of people on kind of the philosophical side studying the Enlightenment,
right?
And normally if you're kind of looking at it from that way, you would trace, at least at the educational level, that these things are really being hashed out in the 1800s, and then they really start to bear fruit into the 1900s. But so is there something going on in America where some of those kind of notions are present already during this time?
Yeah, so I mean, America by definition doesn't like certain institutions.
That's true.
And so that's baked in from the founding. And, Second Great Awakening, Methodist revivals take root in Appalachia, where people really don't want to be bothered by governmental structures or any structures. But you take the Second Great Awakening growing into what is sometimes called the Third Great Awakening and the Fourth Great Awakening. Those are not as studied or lauded quite like the first two, but Azusa Street, the birth of Pentecostalism, has to be birthed out of the Second Great Awakening because of that greater emphasis on personal experience, personal revelation. That feeds into a Christianity that says we're no longer shackled by the creeds. You can kind of believe what you want to be true.
Mm-hmm.
And so why wouldn't that feed into the 60s, where now the Christianity that once normed America, well, if we have to question our governmental structure or our parental structure, why not the religious structure as well? And so it's no surprise then that the hippies that do convert to Christianity in the 60s go for a charismatic kind of Christianity that does have its genesis in what happens in the Second Great Awakening.
Okay. And as a reminder, in case I forget, I would like to, towards the end, I want to hash out some more of this. Or if you think this is the time to do it, let me know. But the New Apostolic Revolution, NAR.
Yeah.
I don't know if you looked into that much, but there seems like there's some interesting overlaps there. I mean, that's kind of...
There are absolutely overlaps, yeah.
Okay.
And anywhere you have continuing revelation, it's a recipe for some strange things happening.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's the LDS, whether that's just Pentecostalism in general, or the charismaticism, New Apostolic Reformation, or how the Roman Catholic Church approaches new revelation in some degree.
Okay. Is it better to do that later, NAR?
You're the host. It's your call. Yeah, maybe later.
Later, to lay some groundwork.
Yeah, because we've barely touched on the Mormons.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get back. So that's kind of the setting, and now Joseph. So how does this move to Joseph Smith, and what do we know about him?
Yeah, so Joseph has received the revelation from God that no church is true. Eventually, an angel Moroni will visit him and tell him of an ancient record of proto-Christians in America. And they're written in a golden Bible that he will one day be given access to, essentially when he's ready or when he's worthy. So it takes a number of years for that to happen. He'll allegedly learn from Moroni. He'll be taught by him, but he will eventually be allowed to get the golden book. And so he's able to get the golden book, and he receives the Urim and Thummim in order to translate the book, which are basically a pair of magic spectacles to translate the book.
Which you have on your face right now.
Which I have on my face. These are the actual Urim and Thummim right now. And the gold breastplate with it is under my jacket. I keep it there at all times. That's an interesting bit of history, because if I had to ask you, how did Joseph Smith translate the Book of Mormon, what would you say?
I would not have had an answer, so I would have been shooting from the hip. I would have probably just said that something like speaking, he was given a heavenly language. That would have been my guess.
Usually people know at least... that he looked into a hat with a seer stone, which was a magic rock that enabled him to see, and that's how he translated. And the LDS Church, the big one, today will still usually go with that narrative. But the historical record seems to show that he used the Urim and Thummim for the most part. The seer stone's a little hazier. Now, the Mormons will come at me with this one, and I welcome them to do that. But there are Mormon historians who say he didn't use a seer stone. And the seer stone is tied up in Joseph Smith's past, where he allegedly could find buried treasure with this stone. And what some anti-Mormon apologists will say is that, see, he was doing black magic and he was convicted of fraud and all this and that and the other. It's actually not true. I mean, we can debate whether he was doing black magic. There's a case for that, if a seer stone is black magic. But he was acquitted of every fraud trial. He was brought up on charges of being a disorderly person, and even his employer defended him at that trial. So these kind of trials for treasure digging, they're not the gotcha that a lot of people think that they are. And you have to take Joseph in his context, a context where magic and folk magic especially is the norm. People didn't really bat an eye at this kind of thing. It would have been normal to have folk practices like that in upstate New York at the time. So it's weird for us to say, okay, here's this guy who can look in the ground and find treasure maybe, but it wouldn't have been odd for them. You know, it's akin to water witching, which is where people will take dowsing rods or willow branches in order to find streams of water under the ground. it's related to that in a way. It's kind of the same stream of folk magic. So to say he was somehow, if he was guilty of this, it wouldn't have made him unique. If he were found guilty, he would have been found guilty of fraud. It wouldn't have been for doing magic. It would have been for falsely doing it.
Yeah.
Because it was just accepted then. Folk tales, folk magic, folk remedies were just part of the culture of the day. And I know that when I talk with or read accounts of people who leave the LDS Church, this is one of the things that gets them early on. Oh, Joseph Smith was convicted of being a scoundrel. Well, that wasn't really true. At least not early on. Like he's going to get into some legal trouble. He's going to get tarred and feathered, which that was extrajudicial punishment. He's going to be arrested and sentenced to death, and he will escape that. Over in Missouri, where things get really heated for the Mormons. But a lot of his early life it's spectacular to us now in the context of the discovery of the Book of Mormon, or the alleged discovery of the Book of Mormon. But the folk magic stuff, I don't think needs to give us as much pause as it does.
Okay. So at this point, he's been given spectacles.
He's been given the spectacles.
And that's before he's given...
No, that's all in one package.
All together.
Yeah,
so
there's
now
a cool little package he gets with the golden book. And it relates the story of ancient believers. Now, I firmly believe that it's telling a story that happens in the heartland of America. This is a debate over Book of Mormon scholars. Where does the Book of Mormon take place? Some people think it's a Mesoamerican story. Some people think like there's some fringe theories, like it's in Bali or someplace like that. I really believe that it was written to be a story of the North American continent, the heartland of America. And I won't get into the whole defense of that because it's kind of odd defending a book that you don't really believe in. But you know, when he wrote this, what kind of story was he trying to tell? But think of it as Old Testament stories set in America and the rise and fall of a people, because they go down the broad path that leads to destruction. And it reads like that, and it's a narrative story. It has individual books in it, like the scriptures do, and so it has all the trappings of a work of scripture for people who believe that. Now, the interesting thing about it is, so he's got the golden book, this big heavy tome printed on metal, using the word golden because that's what it's called at the time. Wasn't necessarily pure gold, but anyway. But he kept it on a table covered in a cloth. So there are a group of 3 witnesses to that and a group of 8 witnesses to that book. And it seems like the ones who actually, and this will be in the front page of every Book of Mormon that you're going to find, the testimony of the witnesses. It's not clear to me that they ever actually saw the book when the cloth was off of it. One witness, says he fanned the pages of the book, for example, but it doesn't really seem like they saw it uncovered. So that kind of makes us think, okay, what's going on here? A man by the name of Martin Harris, who would help, fund the translation of this, or the printing of this, rather, he would actually lose 116 pages of the manuscript. We would give it to his wife to look at, and then it disappeared, never to be found. And so he comes back to Joseph and says, hey, I've lost this. What do I do? And Joseph says, well, God is now punishing us for this, so we can't have that book, but we can have, thankfully, there's another book in the Golden Book that's a synopsis of the events of this book. So we can translate that. And for the LDS, for faithful believers, this doesn't give them any pause. It might give you or me pause. But they say, nope, that was a legitimate testing of faith, so this is what happened. Because you have a testimony to the truth of the Book of Mormon. And it's hard to shake a testimony like that. You really believe something is true. Harris was an interesting guy because he kind of went in and out with but never recanted his vision of the book, which he seems to say was in his mind, or in a heavenly kind of vision. Actually, none of the people who claim to have seen the book ever, even when they left the LDS, or what version of it that existed at the time, they never really recanted that they saw the book. That's the interesting thing about this. There are men who get excommunicated, like Oliver Cowdery, who helped Joseph Smith translate the book. He was like the scribe. Emma Smith and Oliver Cowdery were the main scribes for this. Even when he's excommunicated, doesn't go back on the veracity of the translation process of the Book of Mormon. Something I've always found fascinating in the history of it.
So are they claiming that while they're scribing, is Joseph Smith standing there reading that book?
Joseph he's either looking at a rock and a hat and getting the words, or he's using the Urim and Thummim, the spectacles, to translate it. And as he says it out loud, they are writing it down.
Okay, so
that is how the translation process works.
So none of the people that would have saw it would have been able to understand anything that's
it was written in a language that Joseph called Reformed Egyptian.
Okay.
And we don't know what that language is, but he had the gift to translate it. And the gift of translation is very big in early Mormon history, that the leader of the church is a prophet, seer, revelator, and translator. They're not as big on the translation stuff today.
Because they already have their book.
They already have the book.
Which does not have those original 116 pages.
It does not have the original.
So even today, those pages are gone from
lost.
history.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, some breakaway Mormons have claimed to have the pages, but when we're speaking about the main LDS church, no, they don't have the pages. Now, there are other books Joseph claimed to translate, like the Book of Abraham, which is part of the Pearl of Great Price, which is another scripture of the LDS church.
Okay.
Where he took Egyptian papyri and translated what he said was the Book of Abraham. Many scholars today believe that those were actually Egyptian funerary texts that Joseph mistranslated. But the Mormons have a pretty robust apologetics on why that's not true. But it does certainly seem to be the case that they're Egyptian funerary texts that he mistranslated.
So is this movement growing pretty quickly at the beginning?
So early on, it's a little rough. He gets the books published, and him and his friend Oliver go out, and from the very beginning, there are questions about, is this legit, as there would be. You know, this guy claims he has a golden Bible, and it's a New Testament of Jesus Christ. What does this mean? But the books begin to, they're given out. I can't really say they sell. They're given out, and people began to read them, and he does grow a pretty large number of followers relatively quickly. When we're looking at a man who only lives to 38, he's in his 20s here, it grows pretty rapidly. But it needs opposition wherever he goes. So when he's translating the book, people try to break in and steal it, for example. There are all kinds of theories behind the translation process and how he did this. Some of them I buy, some of them I don't. You know, some people say that he completely plagiarized a book called View of the Hebrews, which tells of ancient Hebrews coming over to the Americas and settling, which does sound very similar to the Book of Mormon. Now, he might have got the genesis of the idea there, but I don't know that he plagiarized it. There are other things they try to say he plagiarized from, but the bulk of the work does really seem to be unique. The narrative seems unique. There might be some quotes here or there that are very similar, but it's a pretty big book. You know, you're going to have that. So there are people trying to steal the Golden Book just to see it. There are people who are going to call him a fraud from the beginning. But because we're in a time in America where new revivalistic movements are big, everything is primed for a new religious movement like this, which a Latter-day Saint would say it's not a new religious movement. It's only new because it's been restored. They would say it's a very old religious movement. And so the saints he'll get a following. He'll establish what is called at the time the Church of Christ, and they'll eventually settle in and around Kirtland, Ohio. And
so it started in
you got upstate New York,
and they moved all the way down to
Pennsylvania,
okay,
and then Ohio.
And this whole group follows him. Is that correct?
People start following him. Missionaries are going out, and people are kind of flocking to certain places, especially Ohio and then Missouri, because Zion is going to be in Missouri, at least early on.
Okay,
and so they come in and they really begin to build a community in Kirtland, Ohio. It's where their first temple is built. And up until recently, that was not even owned by the LDS. That was owned by an early breakaway group, the RLDS, or Community of Christ, that followed Joseph's wife, Emma, and her son, rather than followed Brigham Young. But the first temple is built. It's a little bit different from the temples that you might be familiar with today, where we have these temples scattered all throughout the world, where Mormons do their temple ordinances, sealings, and proxy baptisms and things like that. In these early days, it was an open building. They had worship in there, classes in there. It's where they claimed that Joseph and another one of his associates saw angels. A lot of people there claim to see angels flying around the precipice of the temple and things like that. So it becomes a real hub for the Latter-day Saint movement. They'll kind of come in there. Missionaries will go out. into the United States, into England, and elsewhere. And so they're really starting to build this big movement. But what really kills the movement in Ohio is that they had started the Kirtland Safety Society, which is essentially a bank. And there was a large banking crisis in the United States at the time, and that bank failed. And Joseph was accused by some of his most devout followers of being a fraud and a false prophet because the bank failed when it wasn't supposed to fail. So he heads west. They go into Missouri. They'll eventually go into Illinois. Missouri is an interesting one because there they will face all kinds of opposition. We already mentioned that Joseph will be tarred and feathered. You'll have the Hans Mill Massacre, where Missouri militiamen will kill any number of Mormons. And that's kind of the great debate. Was that justified? Was it okay to just kill these people? From the LDS perspective, they were killed for practicing their beliefs. From the contemporary Missouri perspective, it would be that they were causing trouble wherever they went. They caused societal disruption wherever they went. They weren't to be trusted. They were kind of looked at almost like gypsies.
Oh, yeah.
And so they needed to be gotten rid of. And it got so bad in Missouri that the governor of Missouri at the time, Lilburn Boggs, issued an extermination order. You better pretty much kill any Mormon on sight. So that's in the 1800s. That order was rescinded in 1976. So you could, in theory, do whatever you wanted to a Mormon in Missouri until 1976.
Yeah.
And so it got pretty rough there. Now, as a result of that, the Mormons began to take seriously their self-defense. And on down to today, they still have a very robust preparedness and self-defense culture, and I believe that it comes out of the persecutions that they suffered early on. And that's a question for us, to consider, is because some people listening might say, well, they're just Mormons, who cares? Well, they're heretics, so they got what was coming to them. But in America, it's a bit of a touchy subject where we do have freedom of association and freedom of religion. To even think about a governor going, yeah, we don't like this church, so we're going to kill them on sight if we can. And I'm reducing the history down, but that's basically what it boiled down to. And there were massacres of Mormons. Now, especially later on out west, there are going to be at least one instance, the Mountain Meadows Massacre, where Mormons slaughter predominantly Arkansans trying to get across, over to the northwest, for example. But that's a few decades later. But what happens then, as a result of the persecution in Ohio, and particularly the persecution in Missouri, they're going to, in that time, start to look at Illinois. And they're going to find a city. They're going to take over that city. They're going to rename it to Nauvoo. And it will grow so big that it rivals Chicago for size at the time.
Really?
They'll have the Nauvoo Legion, which is the LDS militia, which causes people to get nervous. Now you have this very large religious movement that has its own army, and its prophet can pretty much do whatever he wants with it. And that will spook people at the time. And so the people in the surrounding communities are very nervous about this movement because of that. The LDS would say that they were not a violent people, that when they used violence, it was for self-preservation. And looking at what happened in Missouri, there could really be some truth to that, just to be fair. And yet, it would make any of us nervous if the LCMS started a militia. I mean, not me per se, but some of you might get a little nervous. But it's so far removed from our kind of quaint understanding of religion today. I'm okay, you're okay, it doesn't really matter. No, for these people, it had real stakes. It could literally be life or death in America at that time.
That's
being
one
Mormon.
Yeah, that's one thing that strikes me is, because, there's this understanding of like, well, as long as you're not harming me, you can do whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. You can kind of raise your kids however you want, which is a very novel and very, I think, unique kind of way of going about this world, right? There is this understanding that if you come in with a certain type of ideology and you share that ideology with my neighbors, if it's going to seep in and it's going to affect my kids, like that is a chief danger. And we're certainly on the other side where it's like, unless if someone's hitting my child with like a stick and knocking his teeth out, up until that point, we're completely unconcerned.
Yeah, we don't think ideology matters at all. And curiously, the Mormons do, and that's probably why they've outgrown everybody or outpaced everybody as far as converts go. When we get into that, I'll submit that for consideration. But a religion that actually, at least outwardly, seems to live what it actually believes, that might actually be attractive to people. A religion with standards, I know it's not popular to have that, I know that we like to nowadays, and don't take my appearance as, being hypocritical or anything, but we don't like this idea of a consistent presentation of ourselves. And in Lutheranism today, we almost revel in this kind of cheesy, rebel, grunge kind of culture that the evangelicals were trying to do in the 90s and 2000s. We're just now catching up to it.
Yes.
And so, but to have hey, these people actually believe in a faith that has a set of standards, and at least outwardly, they seem to live them.
Mm-hmm.
That is attractive to people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like in the book of Acts where, people see what the Christians are doing and they are attracted to that because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not a comment on the truth of the Book of Mormon or anything. It's just this is actually why this happens.
Mm-hmm.
And if we run from that, run from everything external as if it doesn't matter. Not that Lutherans do that, but in some sense we do. Outside of the liturgy, we don't think about it really too much about what am I doing at home? What is my outward presentation? Because of our own theological emphases, we don't think about that.
Mm-hmm.
But the Mormons did. Latter-day Saints did, and it paid off for them in part. The knocking on doors probably didn't hurt either, but that sort of united front that they have is very persuasive. And that united front is born in those times of persecution and in those struggles together moving out west, the west being Missouri at the time, and then the west eventually being Utah, like what we think of as the west today. But Nauvoo would continue to grow, and Joseph Smith would continue translating things. He would get new revelations. It's when he's scouting in Illinois, if I'm not mistaken, that he has the revelation about baptism for the dead or proxy baptism. And we can talk about the theology of that a little bit whenever you want to. It's shortly before his death at a funeral sermon called for a man named King Follett, so it's known as the King Follett Discourse, where he first articulates the idea that man can become God and that God was once a man like we are. That happens just a couple months before his death, for example. So Nauvoo, things really start to take the shape of the Mormonism that we know today. So the temple ordinances start to look a little bit more like what we see. You've got baptism for the dead going on, that sort of thing. By this time, the idea of sealing in marriage for time and eternity has already been revealed, and those kinds of things.
So is it that over this course of time, like, would you say that it's getting more extreme? In other words, is it more and more leading
diverging from creedal Christianity?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm going to use that term because that's the contraindicator that the best Mormon apologists use today. Mm-hmm. And I'm so thankful for the modern Mormon apologists because they have gotten away from the we're all the same and we're just like you. Mm-hmm. This is more like what it was until about the 80s or the 1880s. What would happen, they still get mad when we say they're not Christians because they don't understand that from our viewpoint, if you're so far away from, despite the fact that you claim to believe in Christ, we would see this as a completely different Christ. So from the average Christian's viewpoint, they're not Christians because their definition of God and Jesus is so far removed from what the creeds have established. Mm-hmm. And that's even true of the evangelicals. They believe this because the creeds establish them. Mm-hmm. I mean, the creeds affirm them. The creeds norm these things and make them normative for the church. Obviously, the scriptures establish them.
Right.
And yet, so they still get hung up on not being called Christian. But there was a while where they, at least in my estimation, they wanted to minimize the differences. Now, even in like their Ensign magazine in the 80s, they would still say things like Christians believe, but Latter-day Saints believe this. Mm-hmm. So they would make that distinction. Mm-hmm. So nowadays, the best of their apologists, as far as from a traditional point of view, are going to call us or use a creedal Christian as almost a pejorative. Mm-hmm. Creedal Christians say this, but, restored Christian, Latter-day Saints say this. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that more because that draws the line in a way that we can actually understand what we're arguing about.
Yeah.
And for the layman coming in, or for the person who hasn't studied apologetics or Christian history, that's a little bit easier for them to see that line of demarcation there. Mm-hmm. And I like when they throw punches because it shows more clearly what they believe and what we believe.
Let's agree that we're different, and then we can discuss the differences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, they still want to be called Christians, and that's kind of an impasse for even the most nominal Christian when it comes to the LDS Church. But we agree that there are major differences.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some guys out there that do a good job of contending for Mormonism. Like if I was going to, go like, you want to be a Mormon, you want to hear the best arguments, you want to really argue for the faith, go find these guys
mm-hmm.
and go argue against them,
mm-hmm.
because your iron will really be sharpened. So much of our Mormon apologetics is based in half-truths, things that aren't quite theologically true for the Latter-day Saint, things that are at times historically dubious,
mm-hmm.
But at times admittedly true. And so there's a lot of talking around each other.
Mm-hmm.
But if we just don't pull punches, we can tend to get to a better place.
Yeah. So is there something to where, like, as Joseph Smith is kind of moving, his community's growing, he's having these new revelations,
mm-hmm.
right? And we'll get into the theology of some of the stuff
Sure.
in just a bit. But does it almost seem like he is coming up with ideas that are servicing, put the best construction, the community,
Yeah.
and that's what's causing it to move more and more?
Yeah, I think it is serving the community. And what's funny is Joseph is sometimes portrayed as this guy who just tried to get rich off the back of people. And if you know anything about Joseph Smith, it's that he was a horrible businessman and he was regularly broke. If he wanted to get rich, he did a very, very poor job of it. And so he obviously wants to be the man in charge,
mm-hmm.
and wants to be seen as the seer and the prophet. So if there are nefarious impulses, then they are for power, not for money. And so there's a case with him where you're kind of left with, is he a legitimate prophet? Is he a fallen prophet, as some breakaway Latter-day Saints will say?
Mm-hmm.
Or is he deluded? Does he just really believe this?
What do you think?
Well, I mean, obviously I can't come out and say he's a prophet,
mm-hmm.
but
do you believe?
I tend to take him as sincere.
Okay.
Now that's going to generate a lot of negative comments, but I believe that a lot of people were sincere who were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I don't just, if he's self-serving, like I said, it's for the attention, it's for the power. But you don't always get that, because he would delegate things to other people. He would, the man was tarred and feathered. The man was
mm-hmm.
sentenced to death. The man was beaten for this. And so he could have taken the easier route and said, let's be a little bit more normal, still listen to me. God gave me this revelation to make it easier. And every time he gets a revelation, he doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So he could have been really wrapped up in this. He could have truly believed that he was receiving this.
Mm-hmm.
Now you could take another extreme and say that demons were talking to him,
which will be our other discussion much more.
Yeah, and
but yeah,
the LDS don't like that because they don't see anything demonic in his revelations.
Mm-hmm.
And they would say, point to me where anything's demonic. And we say, well, it contradicts Scripture. They would say, no, it contradicts your wrong interpretation or translation of Scripture. Because Joseph also, and this is part of the revelations there, does correct the Gospels and adds some things to the Bible in certain revelations. And he did work on his own translation. That does exist. His sort of edition of the Gospels with notes, I guess you could kind of say it's got some additions and some subtractions and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tend to take the viewpoint that he was sincere, but very misguided. And part of the reason I do this is because I see a lot of people who get wrapped up in the charismatic movement who are very, very sincere about what they believe, and will come up with some of the most ludicrous revelations or some of the most off-base kind of things, things that patently aren't biblical, but there's no evidence there that they're intentionally deceiving.
Mm-hmm.
Their spiritual framework begins with private revelation, however that comes, if it's dreams or visions or whatever. And when somebody has something like that, it's very hard to shake them from that.
Mm-hmm. I was watching or listening to a podcast just recently, and one of the individuals was making a really good point in that, when it comes to spiritual realities, pride is one of the most dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Because pride, and you can see this even if you take the spiritual component out. Well, pride makes you trust the voices in your head much more. And even if you take the spiritual component out, at the very least, you can see that where someone is a very successful business person, but then they get involved in like a non-for-profit, or maybe they get involved in church or something like that, and something comes up, and that person will be so confident in their decision because in their realm, they're an expert in this field, so they're so used to trusting the voice in their head that they come over here and they're making huge theological missteps because that's not their area. So just because you're good at one thing doesn't mean another, but that practice of pride makes you very reliant on yourself. And then if you want to add in the spiritual component and you want to say, well, maybe the devil and maybe demons do try to twist things in our mind so that we can be convinced of a non-truth and call it truth, the more prideful you are, the more apt you are to just trust that voice without testing it versus external things.
Yeah, and these are discussions I've had with my Mormon friends. Let's, for the sake of argument, say that an angel named Moroni did visit Joseph Smith. Does that mean it's a biblical angel?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that every experience he had was legitimate as he perceived it, that an angel of some kind did come to him.
Mm-hmm.
That's an option, that he could have been deceived by a spirit that way. But the LDS would say, yeah, but look what was revealed to him. There was nothing contrary to the faith. And so you end up with this kind of circular understanding of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can sympathize with that. I mean, these people are sincere in that belief. Because again, when the creeds don't really matter to you that much, when the church has fallen away, and at the time that the Nicene Creed, for example, is established, the church is fully apostate, why would you even care?
Mm-hmm.
Here is the full truth. This is the true revelation in this dispensation that God has given us, and I have a testimony in my heart that it's true. And so it's really hard to shake that. For us, we can sit there and point fingers at polygamists or polytheists or whatever, and someone can be like that. This kind of, what do you want to say, bought into some kind of truth on anything like this. We don't have the framework that they do. We don't have the presuppositions that they do, and especially if you're a cultural Mormon, you're giving up a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, if you're going for the truth, then you should give everything up. That's certainly true. But it's hard to unshake an entire community that's built around this and what's been in your heart, quote unquote, from a very early age.
Mm-hmm.
And so we come up with facts and figures and historic this and historic that, or theological this and theological that, and we get frustrated when people aren't moved by that, by data points. At a certain point, you do have to trust the Holy Spirit to work on the heart. And that's what it takes to win people. And so there's a little bit of truth in that the Holy Spirit does break hearts, and the Holy Spirit does fill hearts, and fills hearts with zeal at times. And because of our own hangups, we don't talk about that too much, because it leads too much toward enthusiasm, and it can. Everything needs some guardrails behind it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the worst thing in the world when the Holy Spirit breaks your heart and convicts you of sin. It's not the worst thing in the world when the Holy Spirit gives you faith and fills you.
Yeah.
And we believe that. We believe the Holy Spirit does all those things. It's just we're very uncomfortable talking about it when it's happening, or when it does happen, because we don't really have the language to navigate that, or sometimes the experience to navigate that. But for people who have had spiritual experiences, it becomes very hard, whether those are legitimate experiences or illegitimate experiences, to shake. And so we come up with all kinds of things, and we wonder why Mormons aren't becoming whatever. Well, it's not always that easy to unshackle something and to change your entire worldview.
So let's go through the rest of the history here, and that way we can circle back, get to the tenets and unpack some of these things. So he's in what's the city in Illinois he's in?
Nauvoo.
He's in Nauvoo. So what happens from there? Does he move from there, or?
Well, not quite. Only about 45 minutes south. So King Follett Discourse, going to be important again. Man can become God. God was once a man. Then allegations will surface, and allegations have always kind of dogged him. And this is why I said people might get mad, because I said maybe he was sincere, because now we're going to get into polygamy. Was Joseph Smith a polygamist? Now, this is an interesting question. The LDS openly acknowledges that he was. The problem is the evidence that we have that he was a polygamist. I certainly think he was. I think the evidence is there. But most of it comes from court cases that happened after his death, and a revelation that Brigham Young handily found in a roll-top desk on the way out west. He denied that he was a polygamist publicly, which as one would. His wife, Emma Smith, went to her grave denying that he was a polygamist. And so, but what happens in Nauvoo toward the end is, a newspaper is published. One of the key figures in that was a man named John Bennett, who was expelled from the LDS for licentious living. And it's called the Nauvoo Expositor. It has one issue. It says that Joseph and other Mormon authorities were engaging in plural marriage. It says that they were even engaged in infanticide, all kinds of very grim allegations. Joseph does not like this, so he orders his guys to go and destroy the printing press.
The militia.
Yeah, and others. Whoever wants to go over, but yeah, his militia to go destroy the printing press. Now, the destruction of the printing press was actually the big deal then. It wasn't even like the bad stuff in the paper. This is early America. You don't destroy the press. And they did. And so he is sent to Carthage jail just south of Nauvoo. He and his brother Hiram, John Taylor, would be up there, and a mob would come in, and they would kill Joseph and Hiram. And there's some debate over what exactly went down, but we know that Joseph was shot, his brother was shot, Joseph was shot while sitting in a windowsill, falls out from the second floor of the jail, and is dead at that point. Him and his brother both die. For a while, the bodies, they didn't even know where they were. But that's a story for another time. The debate is, and it's a fun one, is did Joseph try to fight back? So one of the things is when the mob comes in, he raises his hands up and says, "My Lord and my God," which if you read the narrative almost sounds like just an expression of horror that they're about to kill you. Some think that that was a Masonic distress signal, that he was trying to call out to his Masonic brothers at that time. Because there is a heavy Masonic influence in Mormon temple theology. Some Mormons will admit this, others won't. Some will admit it and say, yeah, that's because Masonry has some truth in it, but Mormonism purified it, for example. But the big controversy is, did they smuggle a gun into Joseph Smith and did he fire back? And to me, I'm the wrong guy to demonize for that. I mean, if a mob's coming to kill you, I don't know, maybe do something about it. But that just makes him cooler. But some say he shot back, some say he didn't, and Mormon history goes back and forth on this. Okay. But what we don't debate is the fact that he was shot and died. And from there, Mormonism has a choice to make. The Latter-day Saint movement is without its leader. What do you do? Most of them go with Brigham Young, who will eventually go out west. And he will be the governor of the Utah Territory. He will fight the federal government. He'll be removed as governor and fight the federal government. Outside of Joseph Smith, he is the biggest character in Mormon history.
Is he already a big character?
He is already a major player.
So he was kind of an obvious choice.
He was baptized into the LDS, I believe, in 1832.
Okay.
So we're in 1844 here, when Joseph is killed. And so most go with him, but it's interesting. There are other people. There are people like Sidney Rigdon, and his followers are called the Rigdonites. Sidney Rigdon was a very early evangelist for Joseph Smith. He was originally associated with Alexander Campbell and the Churches of Christ that we mentioned earlier. Some have a conspiracy theory that Rigdon secretly helped Joseph craft the Book of Mormon. You'll find that in the Smith-Rigdon theory. You'll find this in all kinds of anti-Mormon apologetics books. I don't think that theory holds any water at all. It's like one of the three conspiracy theories I don't believe. But some would follow him. James Strang is another one, the king of Beaver Island, as he would be known, assassinated. His followers are in Voree, Wisconsin. There are still a handful of those followers out there. But most notably, the RLDS, the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who followed Emma Smith and Joseph Smith's son. He was young at the time.
So Emma's Joseph Smith's wife and son.
Yes, Joseph Smith's only acknowledged wife. We got to get back. We'll get back to polygamy, I guess, in a minute. But so they follow Emma and her son. There is some evidence at the time that Joseph intended it to be kind of a lineal succession like that. There is some evidence there. But that's not what happens. The majority go off with Brigham. Now, this question of polygamy will continue to kind of haunt the Smith memory. Did he actually practice it? And the RLDS says no. They're now called the Community of Christ. They're much more on the progressive side of the Latter-day Saint movement today. But they would be an early example of people denying Joseph's polygamy. These court testimonies will come out later that say, no, we were spiritual wives to Joseph, some for time, some for eternity. Probably the most scandalous one is Fanny Alger, who was a young girl,
Yeah,
and he
I was gonna ask about
allegedly
that, yeah.
married her.
And how old was she, allegedly?
I believe 14
Okay.
is the age. And so, on the one hand, you could say, well, that was common at the time to marry that young. On the other hand, you could say he already had a wife.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who come out and testify that, yeah, Joseph said, hey, I'm going to take your wife to be my wife. And to me, okay, if you're practicing polygamy, that's the worst way to do it. Like, you can kind of go along, because for Old Testament reasons, to say, okay, he just took a bunch of wives.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're taking wives from other men, now we've got a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a problem before, obviously, but that's a bigger problem.
This is an easier case to make.
It's an easier,
against him if he's doing that.
Yeah,
in
like
public,
if you're trying
in
to
front of you.
justify it, you could say, well, the patriarchs, look at the Old Testament.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just like whoever. I'm like Solomon. I'm all wise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not that you should. I got to look directly at the camera for that one. But when you're taking other people's wives, obviously a problem. I think the weight of history points toward him being a polygamist.
Okay.
But I find it interesting that there are groups that will adamantly maintain that he was not. And they make a fair case.
Was this to kind of keep the integrity of his name, or is this more so because they didn't like the idea of polygamy in their ongoing community?
It's one of two things. Either they legitimately believe he wasn't a polygamist,
Mm-hmm.
or to keep the integrity of their community, because they know that Americans don't like him now. They're really not going to like him if they're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Because you got to think, by now, that means you have baptism for the dead. You have these temple ordinances that are happening, these endowments, these secret rituals that they do, which is already spooky to a lot of people. And now you have this God doctrine, that God was a man. And you're already starting to see them go even further and further away from Trinitarian Christianity at this time, because now they'll always say God and Jesus. And we say that sometimes sloppily, but we would never say there was a time where God was not Jesus, or the Son wasn't God.
Mm-hmm.
They say that Jesus the Son has a body of flesh and bone. We would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
They also say the Father has a body of flesh and bone.
Mm.
And where you find a lot of this theology is not in the Book of Mormon, but it's in the Doctrine and Covenants, the other revelations that happen. So the Book of Mormon, if you take it, and there's a Pentecostal scholar out of Tennessee whom I respect, and I've just forgotten his name, wrote a great book called A Pentecostal Reads the Book of Mormon, and a big, thick book, and a fascinating book. And he basically says, and I agree with him, that what you have in the Book of Mormonism is kind of a soft modalism. Like the Book of Mormon itself, taking out the story being true or not true, presents a pseudo-modalistic kind of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
The real deviations come later in other revelations.
Can you explain what that is for those?
Modalism?
Yeah.
Well, the idea that God is not one God in three persons, but he is one God who is sometimes the Father, sometimes the Son, sometimes the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
That would be modalism.
Okay.
And so, so you have the Book of Mormon that sits as its own thing. And then you have the other developments that come after. I think a lot of people think that you'll open the Book of Mormon and find baptism for the dead, or Adam God doctrine, or something like that, which is a doctrine that the LDS Church today rejects, that Brigham Young did not reject, the idea that Adam is the God that we know. Nowadays they teach that Adam that we know is Michael.
Okay.
But
interesting.
Yeah, but I digress.
Okay. We'll get into that.
It gets complicated.
Yeah.
And so the greater changes come in these further revelations. And so perhaps for the RLDS, it's like, how far can we go and still be legitimate?
Mm-hmm.
And if they truly believe that polygamy was not legitimate, they couldn't go with Brigham Young,
mm-hmm.
who would be openly polygamist. And you could get away with that way out west in
Mm-hmm.
Wild West times. You could get away with it.
Yeah.
Nobody would stop you. They might try, but what are they going to do? And then especially when you found a city like Salt Lake City that becomes so important in the West, what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And it had to get pretty far out there before the federal government would even do anything regarding Brigham Young. But the polygamy stuff would dog the Mormons until the late 1800s, where a revelation would come to the president of the church that it was wrong to practice polygamy. So that manifesto in the late 1800s, which allowed Utah to become a state.
Okay. So let's go. So I'm guessing we follow Brigham Young,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the best way to kind of trace the history to today. So they start to move out west. So what's that process look like?
Yeah, it's a fascinating process where you have all these new converts to the Latter-day Saint movement, and they're spread out all over the country sometimes overseas. They need to gather somewhere. They're going to gather in Zion, right? Eventually, maybe one day in the future, that'll be Missouri again, but for now, it's out west.
Yeah, it's a better place to gather than Missouri anyway.
Yeah, right? And so...
They do pick their properties well.
They do.
I wish the LCMS was a little better. It's like we've got all of our forces where mosquitoes live and winters are harsh, and they go out to the beautiful mountains.
And you've got these very
Hawaii.
Interesting stories. They started to develop their own folklore very early on, and fascinating stuff. So they move out west, and sometimes in hand carts. So people are literally hand dragging the carts out there, and they contract with companies to do it, and that's how we kind of get an idea of what a better businessman Brigham Young was than Joseph. Joseph was not this great planner, although he might have wanted to be. Brigham was. Brigham built this city. Brigham built this machine that is the LDS Church that we know today. And ever since then, they've been very good at this. I mean, they've got billions of dollars in the bank. They have a charitable system that is kind of amazing to see. They've kind of gotten rid of their canneries where you could actually go and can your own stuff. But if you look at the machine that is the LDS Church today, it is very, very well organized. And the genesis is there in the move out west with what Brigham Young laid down. Brigham Young does some things that we don't always associate with Mormonism. He used to speak in tongues a lot, for example. We don't really think about that with Mormons today. That was a fairly common part of early Latter-day Saint worship, for example. You even sing in tongues.
So I've heard, just as kind of a quick aside, that's very common in Hinduism. A lot of Native American religions had that. So this idea of speaking in tongues is something that we maybe first think of like Pentecostalism. This manifests in a lot of
different places. Yeah, in the popular consciousness, it belongs to the Charismatics and the Pentecostals, but there are certainly predecessors to that. So they're not the only ones in that game. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So Brigham goes out, and things do develop. Theologically, they develop. Culturally, they develop. They become probably more insular than they ever were, more hesitant of outsiders. It could be dangerous at times to travel through the Salt Lake territory. They get out there, and they claim to be overrun by crickets. It's an interesting bit of Mormon folklore. And God miraculously sent seagulls all the way out there to kill the crickets, for example. So they see these signs as signs that they're doing the right thing. They have Brigham Young at the top, who is, he believes in blood atonement, which is a doctrine that they don't really believe today, which is the idea that some sins are so heinous that they can only be atoned for through death. So if you do something bad enough, you have to be executed.
So through your own death.
Through your own blood. It's your own blood atonement. Okay. Yeah. Not blood atonement like we would think, but your personal blood needs to be shed. Adam God doctrine will be one that I've already mentioned. And then, of course, the open understanding of polygamy. Probably most notorious today outside of polygamy is the idea that blacks could not hold the priesthood, which the priesthood is something we've not touched on yet, but that was, according to Joseph, restored to him and Oliver Cowdery first in the form of the Aaronic priesthood. John the Baptist comes to him and says, here's the Aaronic priesthood. This gives you the authority to baptize and to do certain blessings and things like that. That's the priesthood you get usually in the LDS Church as a man between the age of 11 and 18 today.
Okay.
And then later on, I believe it's Peter, James, and John who appear to them and give them the Melchizedek priesthood, which gives them the authority to seal marriages and do a lot of the Mormonish things that we really think of today.
What's seal marriages mean?
That is where you get married and a special ordinance is done to where you are married for all eternity.
Is that something you can choose later on?
Well, that's an interesting one with marriage. Do you want to get into the...
Like, can you go 10 years and be like, you know what, let's seal this? Or be like, let's keep this temporal. No, you can seal it later. Okay.
You can be married just for time.
Yeah.
In the LDS Church today, and actually originally you could, because some people could choose just to be married for time, especially for second or third marriages. So I've been sealed to my first husband. I want to be with him in the celestial kingdom forever. But if I marry this guy and I'm sealed to him, who am I sealed to in the afterlife? They don't always get sealed to their spouses.
Okay. So these are some things that are coming up under Brigham Young that are becoming...
Yeah, I mean, the sealing for eternity existed with Joseph Smith, but it comes into what we know now, especially in the temple ceremony that we would know now, really under Brigham Young.
Okay. Oh, that's right. It comes under the kind of the new priesthood that goes back to Melchizedek.
Yeah, but the Melchizedek priesthood is given to Joseph Smith. So Aaronic priesthood and Melchizedek priesthood are established at the time of Joseph Smith. It expands under Brigham Young.
More people can enter into that.
Yeah, more people can enter in because more people are coming.
Yeah.
The temple endowments were an early thing that Brigham was involved with. So naturally, he's going to have a hand in how those are revealed later on when he's
Can you take the time to explain those now?
Some of them I will, as generally as I can, because they are secret ordinances. We don't want to reveal everything.
Okay, yeah.
But Mormons get offended when you reveal these, but we can safely say that they are, and some of them I won't go into because they're different from Brigham Young's day than they are today.
So these are specifically what's going on at Brigham Young.
Brigham Young, well, and later. I mean, they've changed. They've softened over the years. So you no longer have to make a vow that you'll cut your own throat if you depart from your covenants that are made in the temple, for example. But we know at the time there were ritual washings that were involved, and that continues down to today. They're no longer nude as they would have been originally. Some of the garments have changed a little bit, for example, that go on in there. We know, like in Kirtland, for example, in that first temple, the early days of the endowment, there were ritual washings with like cinnamon whiskey, like with Fireball, early Fireball. That obviously doesn't happen now.
Okay.
So what was originally like being in a tub to represent like these endowments, these covenants that you were taking on, is now more of a ritual washing today. It's more standardized today. A lot of the temples being built are on the same footprint, for example. And a lot of times it's recordings that are played. It's not live anymore like it would have been in Brigham Young's day. Although there have to be temple workers there, of course, to do it. But there are not quite like videos, but like canned presentations that you'll hear to explain what you're doing.
Okay.
And they're different for baptisms for the dead, sealings, other kinds of endowments that you can get.
And is it similar to the Masonic Lodge where there's kind of levels?
There are
So as you
degrees
enter
of
into a
initiation.
degree, then you do a new...
there are different initiations. Yeah.
Okay.
And really for the Mormons, it's different things, right? So I'm going to be sealed here. I'm going to do this here. But there are further and further things you can get. Now, it's not like the Masons, however, where their teachings are hidden. So in Masonry, allegedly, it's supposed to be secret. And you only learn once you get to so many degrees. There are certain things in Mormon history that are reserved only for the apostles, the 12 apostles, but we know what they are. So how secret are they? The temple ordinances were meant to be secret, just like in Masonry. What you're doing there was supposed to be secret, but they got leaked pretty early. And sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're less than accurate. Nowadays, when you can sneak a video camera into a place, you can get a pretty accurate idea of what's going on.
So are all the ordinances that they do now, are they all pretty much public? Like have almost all of them?
They're all done in private, but what's going on in there is pretty much an open book.
Okay.
Now, some of the particulars of what's done, they keep guarded, but it's kind of an open secret. But their theology isn't hidden. We're going into the temple in order to be sealed for eternity. We're going into the temple to baptize on behalf of the dead. We're going into the temple to make this covenant to the faith forever. So that part's not secret. They've not hidden a lot of things like what people say they did. Everything that I've found has always been kind of published in the open, just people didn't read it. And it might be true that they hid it in a way like when they knock on your door, right? They're not going to start out with, do you want to be an eternal family forever and eventually become God yourself? That's not your first line. And people would say they deliberately hide that because they know it would be so strange to people they wouldn't convert. Maybe that's true. But as far as their official publications, none of that's ever been hidden, really. Maybe in the 20th century when they began to temper some things, they minimized things to the degree that you wouldn't know this.
Okay.
But pretty much throughout all their published history, this stuff's been there. They've been pretty open about it. You just have to read it. And I guess maybe people are thinking, well, most people won't go that far into it. They'll convert, they'll be baptized, but they won't study that far. And so they're just a Mormon forever not knowing. Maybe that's part of what they're thinking.
So now the community's growing there under Brigham Young. At this point, they're in Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
And so what happens from there? Because you said at some point like they get into trouble with the government, and so where?
You have like Mountain Meadows Massacre where the settlers are killed. And they blame the Indians, but it was the Mormons. And the great debate is, did Brigham Young know? He probably did.
What was the reasoning behind this?
They don't want Gentiles in their territory.
Will they use that word?
Yeah, we're Gentiles.
Okay.
Back in the day, they won't say that today. In like 1927, I think it was 27, maybe in 57, they adopted what's called a good neighbor policy, to where they don't insult us as much, and a few other things changed and kind of softened their public image. They went big into PR.
Okay.
Lesson learned, because prior to that, they all Mormons were seen as long-bearded, scraggly, fundamentalist weirdos.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason that you get the clean-cut Mormon image today is part of that good neighbor policy.
Ah, okay.
Prior to that, the stereotype was polygamist, outlaw, fighting the government.
So do they look kind of like hippies with guns?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I feel seen.
Yeah.
But they like one of the greatest characters in Mormon history is Porter Rockwell, who was Joseph's friend growing up. He was kind of Joseph's bodyguard. He'll do the same for Brigham Young, and he'll live until Joseph Fielding Smith, nephew who becomes president, up until his life, until Orson or
nephew of Brigham Young,
of Joseph Smith.
Okay, who travels with Brigham Young?
Yeah, and actually, don't quote me on that. Actually, don't quote me. I get because I'm dealing with Joseph Smith Sr., Joseph Smith Jr., Joseph Smith III. So don't quote me on where Joseph Fielding Smith falls in the hereditary line, if at all. So anyway, Porter Rockwell, Joseph gave him a blessing that said if he didn't cut his beard or cut his hair, no bullet or blade would harm him. And he was in a lot of gunfights and never got killed, never really got hurt. And he only cut his hair once. That was when a lady had a disease that caused her hair to fall out. So he cut his hair once so that they could make a wig for her. And, it's, some people want to give him credit for inventing the snub-nosed revolver.
Okay.
They want to give him, as Brigham Young's avenging angel, the credit for that. And he did carry cut-down revolvers. I don't know if we can really historically give him all the credit, but he was also accused of plotting to assassinate the governor of Missouri who put the extermination order out. And basically they make a hit on somebody who tries to kill the governor, doesn't do it. Porter Rockwell gets arrested for it. And his defense is, if I had intended to kill him, I wouldn't have missed. And so he gets out of it. And there's this very interesting eulogy that Fielding Smith gives Porter Rockwell at his funeral. And he talks about what a great saint he was and what a great friend he was to the Latter-day Saint Church. And he says that, and now, Porter is in heaven and apostates can go to hell. And that's a pretty cool way to get eulogized, don't you think?
Yeah, that is.
I mean, we'd probably lose out in our honorarium if we tried that at any of our funerals.
Yeah,
but,
so he's a pretty BA character in general.
Oh yeah, I mean he's a really true Wild West outlaw character, and like a lot of Wild West outlaws, he came from like New England, and so yeah, but he's like very much that outlaw frontiersman kind of guy. Okay, and but that's the kind of guy that Brigham Young wanted around. That's the kind of ethos you had at the time, and from the LDS perspective, it was necessary to protect their people, but from the governmental perspective, this is just a foreign army. This is occupied territory now. They've taken over United States territory. So they removed Brigham Young. There's some skirmishes with federal troops.
They actually did remove him.
He is removed, yeah, as territorial governor. And so he, he'll eventually pass away. You'll get a succession of other presidents leading up to the manifesto in the late 1800s that outlaws polygamy for the sake of statehood. And some people say, and maybe it's true, that this was only ever meant to be temporary. There's some evidence of that in the primary sources. There's actually some new evidence out of that now, but I've not gotten a chance to look at it from one of the presidents of that era. But we do know that some Mormons ran off to Mexico to continue to be polygamous. Some just stayed in Salt Lake City or the Salt Lake area, traditional Mormon territory, and were polygamists. Some were jailed even in Utah for that because it was against the law. And that's really the beginning of the fundamentalist movement as we know it. So we think about fundamentalist Mormons today. We think like Warren Jeffs and a bunch of wives in prairie dresses, that sort of thing. That gets its genesis with that manifesto in the late 1800s.
Okay. So where do we go from there to today? Does anything kind of monumental happen through the 1900s?
And, there's so much, that we can't cover, like, the theories behind the book, or, what was, if Joseph had the word of wisdom that says don't smoke and don't, drink hot drinks, why were these things brought into Salt Lake City? We haven't even touched on the Mormon stereotypes, right? No coffee and the garments question. But I think it's more fascinating to go into the LDS as we know it today, because there's been a lot of stuff written about the fundamentalists. And I've spent a lot of time looking at these divergent paths in the Restoration. And there's a great podcast, if you want to learn about this. My friend Rick Bennett hosts it, Gospel Tangents. He's probably more on the progressive side, but he's a member in good standing of the LDS.
Mm-hmm.
And he has tons of guests on that talk about not only the Brigham Young side of it, but all these different paths that go and where they go down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's like how Alice Cooper is technically a Mormon. Because his family was in one of the offshoots.
Okay.
That only believe in the Book of Mormon. They believe in the Bible and the Book of Mormon. They don't believe. Now, Alice Cooper's not that today, but there were these groups that said, nope, the Book of Mormon was what we needed. Everything after that doesn't count. But for the most part, it's the LDS. That's where the numbers are. Those are the people that followed Brigham. When people hear Mormon or LDS today, or Latter-day Saint today, that's what they think of. The Salt Lake-based Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. How did they go from this image to what they have today? And part of that was that PR campaign. They really wanted to be seen as normal and good Americans. And so they're clean-shaven now. They don't make a habit of talking about the very different doctrines that they have like they would have in the past. Brigham Young didn't shy away from anything controversial. And so you have the beginnings there in the 20th century of them rebranding themselves and becoming the church of all those PSAs that you and I saw when we were kids, right? This message brought to you by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so they go on into that, and they have always been practicing their missionary work from the very beginning. It develops into the program that we know today, where if you're a young man or a young woman, you're sent out 2 by 2 to go out, and, you know, it's a big part of their culture. You can go anywhere in the world. It's like our vicarage or call nights, except probably a little bit more extreme. And they announce where you're going, you find out, and that's where you go. So their message is spread through that, probably predominantly through that for most of their history. But they're also going to have a big media arm. So a lot of these famous illustrations in the Book of Mormon, for example, were from the same guy that did artwork for Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments and things like that. These really cool works of art that we have in some editions of the Book of Mormon that you've probably seen and not know it. If I had a nickel for every LCMS church bulletin that used Mormon art, I'd have quite a few nickels.
Yeah. What do you think about with them? Because they have Angel Studios as well, right? Which does The Chosen. You know,
do they outright own Angel?
Well, that's
or are they heavily invested in it? It's kind of like The Chosen, right? You've got a dispensationalist kid who's the showrunner.
You got a Roman Catholic that plays Jesus.
Yeah, and so it's kind of a mixed bag.
I think one of the
they're filming. They're definitely filming at LDS-owned studios now.
Okay. I think, can you look up who owns, I'm pretty sure the owner of Angel Studios is LDS.
They also have a streaming service called Living Scriptures.
Okay.
And you get a lot of stuff on that. Angel Studios is definitely slicker. So they've been always ahead of the curve on media.
It is. What's the guy's name? Okay, so it's a couple brothers.
It is definitely
and they're all LDS. And they own Angel Studios? Okay.
All right. Well, apologies to Neil, Daniel, Jeffrey, and Jordan. I didn't know they were full owners of that.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting because they're comfortable putting out. I mean, so is that part of like that media approach where one of their goals is to show
Living Scriptures, which is they have non-LDS stuff on there. There's a ton of LDS stuff, and I guess with Angel Studios, I don't remember seeing anything particularly LDS. Maybe that's But they're not officially LDS owned. I mean, they're owned by LDS members, so maybe their focus is to reach the broader Christian spectrum.
So that's part of their big push there.
Yeah.
And part of that is to show we're good American citizens.
Yep.
We're a well-functioning community by the standards
just
that
like
you already have.
Yeah.
And also to show like we're Christian and we're not that different. We're a little bit better, but we're not that different. So it's an easy jump to go
It's an easy jump to go through. Yeah. And there's the principle that was established in the 19th century of lying for the Lord, where some of the LDS gurus would say it's admissible to lie and to misrepresent if it's for the kingdom. I don't know that they're intentionally trying to do that either. I think that's one of those unfair criticisms we give to Latter-day Saints today.
Okay, yeah.
And maybe it's just the circles I run in. They're very transparent with me.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't consign me to hell because they don't have hell like what we think of.
Yeah, I think, but they can.
You can go to outer darkness.
Yeah, and can they seal you in that way, or something?
Yeah,
because I think they did that to my dad.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Did your dad lose his testimony?
No, he's always been Lutheran. He's a Lutheran pastor, but he had some run-ins where
they're shaking the dust off their feet. They know it's like when Jesus says, if they won't receive your word, shake the dust off your feet.
Okay.
That's what they did to him.
Okay.
No, he's probably going to make it to the celestial kingdom.
Okay, good.
Because your dad's a Christian, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he makes it to heaven one.
Okay.
So this is also one of the early revelations, the idea of...
But they're not going to drink in heaven 2, 3, 4? No coffee 2, 3, 4?
Well, we'll get to that. So let's tackle degrees of glory, then we'll tackle what you can and can't drink.
Let's jump right in now into the theology.
Yeah.
So if you can kind of get to, especially for those who know very little about what the Mormon Church believes, can you just start with what's kind of the ethos of their theology?
Sure.
What's some of the core tenets, and then that'll help build us into some of these other nuances.
So following Joseph Smith, for the LDS, God was once a man like you or I was, who progressed to his godhood. And now he is God. He is like us, but they'll at least today admit, or some of the apologists will admit, that they'll even sometimes say ontologically he's different now. He's attained something. So they talk about Jehovah or Heavenly Father. That's him. Okay, that's God. We can all become like him one day. And one of the things that he does is that he has his wife, or perhaps wives, and they produce spirit children who will eventually one day have a body of flesh and blood.
So angels are kind of precursors to man?
Angels in LDS theology can just be spirits who have not entered into the mortal world that we live in now, or they're people who lived in the mortal world and departed. So you know how we spend a lot of time telling our members that you don't become angels when you die? Mm-hmm. You definitely do in LDS theology.
Okay. And is that a temporary time period? Is that like a jumping point?
It would be a temporary period. You're eventually going to get some flesh and bone at some point. But you can have flesh and bone, die, come back as an angel. That's what Moroni was. So the Moroni who visited Joseph, was once a man, now he's an angel. Mm-hmm. The idea is that we're waiting for the resurrection. And at the resurrection, you get glorified bodies. Mm-hmm. So that's how... So everybody who comes into the mortal existence from the pre-mortal existence will get a body of flesh and bone, and then now it's time to work toward the greatest glory that you can. That's why Mormons can say that Jesus and Satan are brothers. See, a lot of people kind of skew this one. They think that it's a doctrine that just Jesus and Satan are brothers. No, Jesus and Satan are brothers because we're all siblings, because we all have the same heavenly Father. So Jesus and Satan have the same heavenly Father, and so do you and I in Mormon theology. So that where Jesus came as the Savior and succeeded, Satan came and got his body and was just evil. That would be the idea. If he got his body, he could still be a spirit being. He's still going to be a brother of Jesus in that sense.
So both of them are kind of from a starting point ontologically the same as us.
Correct.
That they, at some point, they were in the same place that you and I are at.
We all start in the pre-mortal existence, and then we enter into the mortal existence where we have flesh and bone. Mm-hmm. And now is the time to progress. So for us, for example, the fall, like the fall of Adam, is a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather not live here, right? With death and disease and everything. For them, for most Mormons, it's a fortunate fall because it gives us the opportunity to progress toward godhood. We wouldn't have that if we stayed in the pre-mortal existence. Because God, in order to become who he was, had to go through this. And if we want to be like him, we have to be like him in every way. And that includes going through this trial here in the fallen world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so everything in Mormonism is, as far as the religion is concerned, is geared towards helping you along that path.
Correct.
Where you, like the Christ, like Jesus, will...
And they will often say, we are saved by grace after all that we can do. Whatever that means.
So grace covers what we can't do.
Grace covers what we can't do. But we need to be doing what we can do.
Okay.
And they're very big on... They have a slogan, choose the right. They're very big on moral living because that is very much a part of what we do. It does matter. And... they'll get iffy on if we're saved by grace alone or not. Some will actually say that. Some will say, no, it's faith plus works.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then, what else is kind of in the tenets of? So after I die, do all of us reach that trajectory, or do we all kind of stop at different places along that?
You're going to stop, and you're supposed to not be able to, once you get to one of the three heavens, to not progress. But some say you can progress. But you got three. You got the telestial, the terrestrial, and the celestial kingdom. So heaven level 1, heaven level 2, heaven level 3.
Mm-hmm.
1 is where those who didn't have a testimony of the gospel go to. Pretty much, almost everybody kind of makes it there.
Okay.
You don't get glorified in the same way. You don't get to see God face to face like you would in the other kingdoms. The Holy Spirit can come and minister to you. But beyond that, it's pretty nice, but you're not going to make it beyond that because you didn't have a testimony.
Mm-hmm.
Heaven 2 is going to be, you had a testimony of the faith, but you didn't do a very good job of it. You believed in the Book of Mormon, you believed in the Revelations, but you messed up somewhere, but your testimony was sincere. And I believe in that when Jesus can come and chill with you, I think. But
like a weekend vacation or something like that?
And maybe that's the one where you can see God, but you're not with him. So from that kingdom, you can see him.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and forgive me, I get all the kingdoms messed up. And then finally, the celestial kingdom, that is where you go and you become like God and you're taught by God how to be like him.
Mm.
That's where you can truly have your eternal families. Now, families stay together no matter what. If they're sealed, whatever kingdom they end up in, they're sealed.
Okay. Is it a least common denominator? Like, is it where the husband goes?
It's going to be where the husband goes.
Okay.
I mean, I would assume, everything follows the husband. That actually, they might say that that's unknown, but it would stand to reason that you would go where the husband goes because the priesthood power belongs to the men,
mm-hmm.
and you're sealed to your husband.
Okay.
So you're sealed together, but you're sealed to your husband.
So you could be the most virtuous Mormon, but if you've got kind of a degenerate husband, you might end up in that first category.
Could be. Probably not first. Might get second.
Get second.
But you might get first. I don't know. I'm not God. I don't make that.
Yeah.
I'm not God in LDS theology, so I don't get to make that call.
Yeah. Now, those that go into the third level, are they able to, because now they're like God, are they able then to create worlds? And
it certainly seems that way.
Okay.
And from the early testimonies of their prophets, that's really what they say. And they also say you have to have at least more than one wife to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's some disagreement on how many. But now that you don't have plural marriage,
mm-hmm.
what do? Now, I would argue that the LDS actually to this day still does have a form of plural marriage. Because in LDS theology, the family goes on forever. And that's the ideal.
Mm-hmm.
You want to have your family here and you want that to persist forever. In some ways, a very beautiful and comforting doctrine to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see why.
Yeah.
And so if a man has one wife and he's sealed to her, she dies, he's sealed to her forever, he's sealed to another wife, that's 2 wives in the kingdom
mm-hmm.
for him.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me that there is some room, at least in the eternal sense, of having plural marriage
mm-hmm.
on into eternity. And maybe it'll come back one day. Who knows? We're only ever one revelation away.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And that's kind of the troubling thing, I would think. And that's why when you talk to ex-Mormons, that is one of the troubling things, that revelations change. So polygamy was the way to the celestial kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And now polygamy is a sin.
Mm.
That would be a hard one to live through,
mm-hmm.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
And so, blacks couldn't be ordained to the priesthood. Now they can. That changed in the 70s.
Mm.
So there's another change that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But for LDS theology, that's not a problem. They believe that changes are a normal part of revelation, and that a lot of revelations are conditional. So if they don't come true, like a prophecy doesn't come true, it's largely because we failed up to our conditions to make that prophecy come to pass, for example.
Kind of like the 160-some pages that were lost.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a test of faith, and you failed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can we hang our hat on the idea that we become in all ways like God, that there's at least a pathway towards that?
Correct.
That if we reach that third level, perhaps we need a couple wives in order to move to like the
originally you did.
Okay. In order to, and then we actually become creators, like where we create universes,
if
we
you're
create
like
worlds.
him in every way, what does he do?
Okay.
He creates, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it would stand to reason that yes.
Okay.
And no, God doesn't live on a planet called Kolob. that you might have heard. That's not true.
Oh, really? Okay.
Kolob is the star nearest where God lives.
Oh, okay.
And so get it right. But it's also unclear whether that's meant to be a physical place or if that's kind of a metaphysical concept.
Mm-hmm.
They do have a hymn, If You Could Hide a Kolob, but it's not like a big part of what they do.
Mm.
It's not like that old cartoon where it's like they're obsessed with the planetary thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's there, but I don't think that that's the emphasis that they have.
Okay. Do they have, so is this true or not, that the mark of Cain is being black?
Early on it was.
Early on, not today.
Not today, no.
Okay.
But I don't think you can deny that early on that was openly taught.
Mm-hmm. What was the notion? I've always wondered, maybe you don't have an answer, but I've always wondered, so if that's the case, I'm assuming they would confess the flood?
Yeah.
So how does that continue on through? Like, did some of Cain's descendants...
it's descended from Noah. So that DNA is kind of left there with Noah.
So Noah has
had it explained to me.
Okay. So
Noah carries the Cain gene. And Cain is also a spiritual state too. So the Indians get cursed. That's why they're dark. They get the mark of Cain. It's something that can be given to you later.
So it's kind of like the Nephilim, where you've got the sons of Anak. You've got that before and after.
They're like clinging to the boat, and they make it after. Yeah, they show up again
or
later.
Or it's a spiritual component.
Yeah. And so, exactly. So it's a spiritual curse that can be put on anybody.
Okay.
And the Bible does seem to indicate it's a visible marker, and that's their understanding of it.
Gotcha. Okay. So what about some of the more of those kind of nuanced things that get discussed, like what you were talking about earlier with coffee, with smoking, with drinking?
Yeah, so the word of wisdom basically tells you, don't really smoke, don't eat a lot of meat, which is the one nobody talks about, and no hot drinks. And the great debate has been, what is a hot drink? What does that mean? Does it mean no caffeine? Does it mean literally temperature of drinks? At the time, it was pretty common health advice that hot drinks were bad for you. And the Mormons have really latched on to the no caffeine. And yet they haven't. They haven't, because you'll see a pretty broad prohibition against caffeine. But I think you can get it at BYU now, Brigham Young University now.
Okay.
You have general authorities who were drinking Pepsi, or at least one who was drinking Pepsi back in the day, which has caffeine. And now one of the biggest chains that you can get out in the Utah Territory is called Swig, and it's a dirty soda, which I hate that term. It's a cringe term. Call it something else. Mm-hmm. Sorry if that's a sponsor.
No.
But it's very big amongst Mormons, to where they go and they get a big giant corn syrup concoction loaded with whatever, and somehow that's within the word of wisdom or not, depending. Mm-hmm. So there's always been a back and forth over, is it just a prohibition against coffee? Is it caffeine? Is it actually hot drinks? But the texts say hot drinks. They seem to have relaxed a bit on caffeine. And for a long time, a lot of the Mormons I've known, is they were taught that you can have caffeine if you must. So I went to college with a Mormon. We had like all the same classes for whatever reason. I wonder where he's at now. Probably Utah. But he was like addicted to Mountain Dew. And I remember asking him, doesn't this violate the word of wisdom somehow? And he's like, well, it's up for interpretation.
Yeah.
So Mountain Dew's good. But it is funny that Swig would take such a hold, and things like it would take such a hold out in Mormon country, when it seems, at least from this layman's understanding, that would come close to violating the word of wisdom somehow. And I'm not saying they're being hypocrites here. It's just there's some leeway in how you can do that.
Okay, let's take a quick break, and then I want to ask you some more clarifying questions.
Yeah, sure.
All right, and Bennett says we're back. So a couple more questions here before we close off. And you talked about this earlier, so I'm just interesting because what's the comparison between like Muhammad and Joseph Smith, right? Or like of Islam and Mormonism? Lots of times those things just get kind of categorized as
you'll hear this a lot. Joseph Smith is the American Muhammad, and they'll point to the militia and to the polygamy. And the theory is, if Joseph had been allowed to live, he would have slaughtered people like Muhammad did. But he would have started doing that early, I think. And even when Brigham Young was out there, he never went wholesale to war with the federal government. And some might say this because he didn't think he could win. But you never saw slaughter of American soldiers, for example. You do have the Mountain Meadows Massacre, which was likely ordered by Brigham. The LDS Church denies that. There's some pretty good evidence that he did know that the massacre was going to happen. But that still pales in comparison to what Islam did. And if the Mormon Church was going to do that, they would have done that. and to this day, they have a lot of guns, and even some of the fundamentalists are involved in at least one firearms company. The most significant firearms inventor in world history is John Moses Browning, who is the son of Mormon pioneers. And if they were really that prone to violence, we would have saw more of it. There was a lot of violence in Mormonism, however, especially with the fundamentalists. There are murder cases and other stuff like that. And fundamentalist is an umbrella term for breakaway polygamous sex. And there was violence and there was murder, but that doesn't represent the whole of them. Like the Brighamites, for lack of a better word, who represent the mass of Latter-day Saints today, do not seem any more prone to violence than anyone else. So if they wanted to at some point, they could have tried that, but we don't have it. It's not like what you had with John Brown or something like that, in years past. So, but you do have John Moses Browning, and invented the 1911, invented the Modus machine gun, invented the Winchester 1892, 1894, a lot of cartridges that people are still using today. They have the recipe for extreme violence if they wanted it, and they haven't done it. So I think that comparison is a little bit unfair. Like, what do they have in common? They have armies, and they have polygamy. Congratulations, you just described the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And if that is your baseline for that. Now, some would probably also say, well, they also have their own scripture that justifies what they want to do. Okay, maybe, but you could say that for the Old Testament as well, who had God commanding them to go and destroy the Canaanites or whoever you want to, whatever ite you want to put in there. I'm not saying that the Old Testament kings are like Muslims, and for the same reason, though, I'm not saying Mormons are like Muslims. They have those potential things in common, but we don't see that happening the way we saw it happen with Islam since Islam's beginning, and even on down to today. So I think it's a little bit unfair.
Is their theology and philosophy similar in some ways, or not so much?
I don't think the theology is similar at all.
Okay.
I mean, you have a radical monotheism versus a radical polytheism. That's about as far apart as you could get. Their understanding of the afterlife is different. Now, in some strains of Islam, you might get your 72 virgins in heaven in paradise, but God in Mormonism is very much interested in what we do with our time. In some schools of Islam, God is almost arbitrary about what he does with his providence and what he does with his choice. So I just don't think the two really jive at all.
That makes sense. So what about shifting, right? So what's the kind of dialogue between, creedal Christianity and Mormonism look like today? Because you said you follow some apologists for Mormonism and stuff.
So if I look at
intersection
at like a podcast like Gospel Tangents, Rick Bennett, I think that it's much more friendly. I mean, he had me on the show. I don't know who else he's had on. I mean, he's had evangelicals on it. That's very ironic. Guys like Steve Pinecker, who does Mormon book reviews, he kind of has anybody and everybody on his show. That's very ironic. Over on the more traditional end, it is very combative. But I think, in my opinion, like I said, that's a good thing. It's very open and honest discussion, and there's a lot of back and forth there. So somebody, you can find him on X, like Thoughtful Faith, who is controversial to some people, but I think he's one of the best of the traditional Mormon apologists. Or just go to a Twitter account I like, Lego Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith, if you want to see kind of an example of kind of the dude bro version of Mormonism. But I mean that with all affection.
In a good way, yeah.
Yeah. You'll kind of get a good idea of that. And there's a lot of it out there now. They really latched on independently. These are not LDS approved sources. They really latched on to new media, and they're using it very well. So if you want to, and they're very open about what they believe, and somebody will have a hard question on LDS theology, and they'll answer it very directly with the apologetics that they have. So I think we're more open than we've ever been, more so than we would have been in the 90s. When you had like Mao and Millet, and I always butcher both of their last names, Millet, however I'm supposed to say it. That was about it in the 90s as far as anything notable. Now we have any number of discussions going on that we normally wouldn't have, and new media made that possible.
So I'm guessing there's not a lot of like inroads for well, maybe I'll just ask it this way. So, are there certain approaches or conversations or topics where kind of it's very difficult for Mormons to answer? Because it sounds like, as you were kind of describing Mormon theology and history as it goes through, it's like it becomes kind of a circular
Yeah.
thought, right? So if you like enter in and you kind of point to this, like they're going to have a, response to that based on the assumptions that they already have.
Yeah, and they probably have more ammunition than ever. They have, there's a great transparency with like the Joseph Smith papers and other early church documents that we didn't have in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So they have access to those things and how they're going to interpret those documents. So they're more open to taking on questions, at least as far as the apologists go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your rank and file LDS, I don't know that they would be well versed in this.
Mm-hmm.
One of the areas, though, I think where we have some commonality, as like say the LCMS loses members, evangelical Christianity is probably on the decline as well in some circles. Mormonism grows, but they're seeing some subtraction as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is in the world of anti-Mormon apologetics, people are seeing historical things about Joseph Smith that troubles them. They're seeing the changing revelation in the church, and they're leaving. And if you look at a very popular Mormonish podcast called Mormon Stories, which is an anti-LDS podcast,
Mm-hmm.
they have all of these difficult stories, and they have pro-Mormon people on at times too, but a lot of it are people who struggled with their faith, struggled with the church. And some of it is they'll do polls and say the number one thing was revelations about Joseph's polygamy or treasure digging or those sorts of things. They'll put that at the top. But when you listen to a lot of their stories, what they reject in Mormonism is what a lot of our young people or people in general reject in creedal Christianity. An understanding of the family, a more traditional understanding of the family, issues over homosexuality or transgenderism. You listen to enough of these interviews and they'll start with the historic stuff, and they always end up, or not always, they often end up in the culture war issues.
Mm.
So they wanted to be gay affirming, and so they went to that, or they didn't like the idea of traditional marriage and they go to that. There, I think we have some commonality of, now, although our conception of marriage is in the eternal sense rather different, our temporal understanding of one man, one woman is there. And so we lose people for much the same reason that they lose people.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do have some, or a bit of an alliance there that often goes overlooked. Like we do believe in traditional family values,
Mm-hmm.
for lack of a better term, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And now with Lutheranism, it's trickier because we like to drink a lot and they don't drink at all.
Mm-hmm.
Although they did have wine in the sacrament up until like the 20s.
Oh, yeah?
It was wine, and then they changed it to water.
But that's boring.
Yeah, it's
So
more, yeah.
That's the only time that they would drink.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
It was, we mentioned whiskey and temple rites.
But they would bathe in that.
Yeah, they would bathe in that. But there was some drinking, and there's some evidence that Brigham Young enjoyed a drink or two because he could handle it.
Okay.
It's a baller move. You can't have it, but I can do this.
Yeah, I can handle it. You can't handle it. Yeah, he must have been from Kentucky.
Right.
I mean, it kind of reminds me. I remember there was I don't remember who this was, but they said they did. No, they didn't do college ministry, but they would watch over time, like kids going off to college and coming back and losing their faith. And for a long time, he would deal with that, and he'd be like, so, he would deal with it theologically, right, and try to kind of argue and be like, well, your professor's saying this, da da da. But eventually shifted, and someone would come back and be like, I'm not going to church. I've got this problem, I've got that problem about theology, and he would just be like, who are you sleeping with?
Yeah, exactly.
And the point being, like, that's the real reason these people are falling away, right? Like, they want to do this thing that's rejected by the church, and that's really the motivation. So then they latch on to like, well, we can't trust the scriptures.
And kind of a milder version of that, apologies to Matt Fradd, but how many times have you talked to a guy that's like, well, I'm investigating Roman Catholicism. Oh, yeah, what's her name? What's that Italian girl's name?
Yeah, exactly. I would love for him to have on someone from the LCMS, because like all of their, and good for him for doing it, but they have all these like conversion, where someone leaves Protestantism or evangelicalism, but the conversation always centers on the sacraments. Right. So it's always this like, once they start to understand the sacraments, then they move to Catholicism, which is very true. But then you've got like the LCMS here. It's just like, well, we also have the sacraments, right? So we have to take that off the table.
Well, we didn't have a good neighbor policy. We didn't have a good PR program like the LDS did. So nobody knows. Yeah. Nobody knows we're out here.
Yeah.
We're the girl at the dance that doesn't get picked.
Yeah. So one last question, then we'll close up. So for those, like if someone knocks on a listener's door and, begins talking Mormonism or whatever, what's a good solid place to go to for them?
That's a good question. A lot of it's going to depend on where that person is. I mean, I guess there's a good solid option is to just not answer the door.
Yeah.
Because some people aren't equipped with that, with the skills. One of the things we can do is go to the nature of grace. Where do we measure up to the standards? See where that particular Mormon missionary falls on the saved by grace after all we can do.
Mm-hmm.
Going to the scriptures is tricky because while they do uphold the King James Bible, they do believe it has errors, and their church has corrected that. So we could go to the nature of grace. We could, since they do believe that spiritual endowments come through certain things like laying on of hands, we could probably talk to them about the sacraments. That might be one way to get into it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the atonement is one way that we could talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
They do believe in the atonement. It just starts in Gethsemane and sort of ends on Golgotha.
Mm.
We keep it all at the Passion, but they have it in Golgotha when the bloody sweat comes out.
Mm.
So maybe open up some of those areas where we're a little bit closer and see where we are. But going to the scriptures is going to be a tricky one because you have a magisterial authority that has the key to interpretation. The priesthood has been restored there. Apostolic authority has been restored there. So that's very hard to go to. Perhaps history would help, to show that things didn't completely fall away. Or perhaps looking at some of their history and saying, do you see why this could be an obstacle for me? Why polygamy would, or the changing nature of revelation could be a problem. And then that might be a doorway to them. Conversely, for like, say, some of your members, that could be a doorway for them for the LDS because they might be convinced by some of the arguments. But a lot of the missionaries are not super well-versed in theology or history. And that's not a dig at them. I think people would broadly recognize that. Some of them are very well-versed, but you have thousands of them going out. We just don't know where they're going to be. Some of them know their scriptures very well, know their talking points very well. Some of them don't. And so it really depends on which one you get. And maybe it's just a case of letting the Holy Spirit do it, proclaiming the word that is true, and trusting the Spirit to work there. Because that's a lot of times when it comes to the field of apologetics or contending for the faith that frustrates us so much. Well, this person just won't believe what I'm telling him when it's obviously true. Well, faith cometh by hearing, and the Spirit blows where it listeth. And so trust the Holy Spirit to do that. Bear witness to the truth. Bear witness to, our understanding of Scripture, and trust the Holy Ghost to work there. That's another option. Sometimes we forget that. We always want to debate our way into the kingdom, and it doesn't work that way. Peter gets up at Acts, in Acts 2, he preaches, men are cut to the heart, and they ask the important question, what must we do to be saved? And he gives them the answer, and the church grows from there.
Yeah. Well, Willie Grills, this is fascinating. Thank you. I look forward to our next conversation, which might have already aired. We'll see.
Right. Thank you very much.
Yep. Cheers.
Yep.